welcome. For those who don't know me, I'm Laura Keene, one of the school counselors, and all the school counselors want to welcome you this evening. Thank you so much for coming out. I know it's hard, 7:30 and it's now dark. It's unbelievable that it's getting dark so early. And I want to just thank and welcome Morgan Kelly. She's Director of Financial Aid over at Sacred Heart. She's been with us the past few years and she's just got a wealth of knowledge for all of our families, so thank you so much for coming back. For those of you who have some friends that may not be able to join tonight, we are filming, and the film will be up under video presentations on our website probably within a week. In addition, all of our handouts, hopefully you all grabbed PowerPoint and 2 other handouts, and these will all be online as well. And also for those of you senior parents, can you all raise your hand, please? Oh, fantastic, great. For those of you, if you're unable to make our morning senior parent information session, that was in September 8th, I believe, in the morning, we have that on our website as well that's filmed, all about how your students request transcripts, sending scores. So that's another nice tool if you weren't able to attend that session, that we welcome you to watch that video as well. So Morgan, thank you. And Morgan's going to speak for about 45 minutes, and then at the end she'll entertain some questions as well. So thanks so much and enjoy. All right, let's see if this is on. Oh.
There we go. All right. Just want to make sure it's on for the video as well. Okay. All right, so just a brief agenda of what I'll cover tonight. I know this looks long, but as Laura said, it'll be about 45 minutes. The updates to the FAFSA. So how many people have gone through this process before with another student, just so I have an idea? Okay. So there are some big updates this year. And then just a general idea of what financial aid is, the financial aid applications that you have, how your eligibility is determined, the net price calculator, which is a great tool you should use, and then tips as you go through the spring months. So just some information on loans, outside scholarships, questions that you should ask the financial aid departments at the schools where your student will be attending. So the big change to the FAFSA this year is that the government is going to start to use earlier financial information. So the way that the FAFSA has worked for every student in college, including those who just enrolled, was that the government would always ask for the most recent verifiable income information. The FAFSA is that federal form that your students will fill out for federal financial aid, loans and grants. So to assess a student's eligibility, they want some information they can verify. So in the past, they would say, okay, if your student is enrolled in 2016, use 2015 tax information. The problem with that was that you didn't have 2015 tax information until January of 2016. Your student would have to make a decision on where they're enrolling by May 1st of 2016, and that was just not enough of a time frame for you to get accurate information and then get a financial aid award back that was not an estimate. So the government decided it's really not fair to students to have them be so stressed out and crunched for that time frame. Let's make the form available earlier. So the new FAFSA is going to be available October, so it started this weekend. And this is using what's called prior information. So rather than using the year before the student is in college, it uses 2 years earlier. So for students that are in college in 2017, they are going to use 2015 tax information. So 2 years earlier, which because you have your taxes done for 2015 now, you had an extension will be done in a couple of weeks. It will allow you to not use estimates and to have a solidified financial aid award before you make this decision. So that's the big change that's coming. The form is available earlier and it's using different information. Because this is the first year that this is happening, the timeframes of colleges giving you a financial aid award will not change significantly. If your early decision, which is that binding agreement, it's typically early January that you'll get an award. For early action and regular or rolling admission, you'll get that at the end of February, beginning of March. In future years, as schools have times to adjust their budgets, get ready earlier, the awards will start to come out earlier. So if you have students coming up in future years, things will progress ahead of time so you have more time to make that decision. But for right now, don't expect to see a significant change in those timeframes, but this is just that starting process to get that in place. So one of the biggest misconceptions that we see is that everyone believes that anything that is referred to as financial aid is free, and that's not correct. Financial aid is money that is offered to the student to help with the cost of their education, but it's not always free. So when you get a financial aid award, you'll see different line items, and at the bottom, it's going to say total financial aid. It's important that you read those line items further. Don't just take that total number. The reason I'll outline what makes up financial aid. So if you see something on an award letter that says grant or scholarship, then that's free. That's sometimes referred to as gift aid, but it's free money that is offered to students to help with the cost of their education. So that you can count on from the school, the federal or state government, or an outside source. Work study is a line item you may see on the award package as well. Work study means that your student has the opportunity to work on campus and receive a bi-weekly paycheck. So for example, if your student has an award that says work study $2,000, over the course of the year, they can earn up to $2,000 paid incrementally to them as they work. So you're not going to see this as a deduction on your bill. It's not immediately reducing that out-of-pocket cost you have. It's just allowing the student to earn throughout the year. It's still a great program because it helps them get acclimated to campus and they start to build a resume for when they need an internship, but it's not that immediate cost savings the way a grant or a scholarship would be. And then if you fill out the FAFSA, your student will be eligible for federal Stafford loans. For a freshman, they can receive $5,500 for the year. Some of that might be subsidized, which means the interest is not accruing while they're in school. And some would be unsubsidized, meaning the interest does accrue right away. There won't be payments due on either type while they're enrolled, but that unsubsidized has that interest. So when you get an award package, some of that total financial aid may be a loan. Some of it might be work study and your students earning that. So it's important you don't take that at face value. Break it down further to understand what school is really giving you the best financial aid award and what's really the out-of-pocket net cost for you. So the two main types of financial aid applications that I'll go over, the FAFSA, which again is that free application from the government. This is for federal and state financial aid. Some schools, this is all that they will require. They will give out any money they have on their own with this form as well. The CSS profile is used primarily by private colleges. Not every private college will ask for this, but the difference is this is how that school will give out their own institutional specific funding. So they will still require the FAFSA as well. They'll want both forms so that you still have access to that federal and state financial aid. But for their own money, they'll want the CSS profile. Some schools will take it a step further and have institutional specific applications. So this means that it's an application typically that you would print from that school's website and that you will send back only to that school. The FAFSA and the CSS profile are both submitted electronically, they're done online, there's not really any paper involved. So what I would recommend doing is sit with your student, go over the schools that they are going to apply to, and then go to each school's website. Write down what forms they're requiring and what corresponding deadlines that school has. The other reason that financial aid can be so difficult is because even though most schools are requiring the exact same forms, you'll fill out one form and send it to multiple schools at once, each school may have a different deadline. So you want to make sure that you find the earliest deadline that any school is asking for and get that in, and then you can send it to every school at the same time. We recommend trying to submit the forms at least 2 weeks early because it gives you time to realize you don't know all of the information you need for that form, and it gives the school time to get back to you that something is incomplete or missing, so you can still get that information to them by their deadline. So just be aware of the forms that each school may ask for and that they may all have different deadlines for the same form. Because you fill out the federal financial aid information online, the government wants to verify that you are who you say you are. And so to do that, they issue a student on their own and a parent an FSA ID. It's a federal student aid ID. Depending on when you may have gone through this process in the past, you might have used a federal PIN number. This changed 2 years ago. It's now an FSA ID rather than a PIN number. And what this does is it allows you to sign all of the documents that you need online. So the bottom here is the website that you would go to create this PIN number. And again, every student needs to have their own FSA ID and at least one parent. I recommend that both parents get an FSA ID because it can take up to 3 days for the government to approve it. Just both of you have it. Only one parent is required to sign the FAFSA, but it's better if you just do it at the same time. It takes about 10 minutes to get this. When you look on the bottom here, the information that it's going to ask to issue this ID, name, social security number, it's also going to ask for an email. Make sure that the student is not using their high school email. This should be an account that they're going to have access to well after they graduate, and some generic account that they continue to utilize for the rest of their college career, graduate school if they have that. And in terms of name, don't use a nickname, but also if you are married or divorced or if your last name has changed, make sure that it is the name that's on your social security card. So that way there's no trouble holding this up for you. So the exact information that the government has on file. So when you go to fill out the FAFSA, and again, this is available now, make sure that you are not paying for this form. It is free, as the name states, but it's .gov is the website, not .com. And this, again, is something that creates eligibility for that federal and state money. You'll submit this every year that the student is in school, and it's one FAFSA per student, not one per family. Want to back up to that FSA ID for a second. If you are a parent of multiple students, so you have 2 students in college at once, you do one FAFSA for each of them. But your FSA ID as a parent, what you're signing for their forms, you only need one. You sign that for each of their forms when it requires a parent signature. Each of your students has their own unique ID to sign it with. So again, one FAFSA per student, not per family. It does take into account if you have more than one student in college because it will ask those types of demographic questions. And those demographic questions are, as of 2017, the application you're completing, how many students will be enrolled? 1, 2, or 3, however many. Even though it's asking you for 2015 financial information. This is going to ask you also for asset and income information as well. It does specify on the form what type of assets it's looking at. It's not looking at the value of your primary residence. It's not looking at the value of your overall retirement fund. So if you just read the descriptions, it will tell you what it wants you to put there. If you have a rental property or a second home, it does want that included in your overall assets. For the 2015 tax information, because you have it submitted already, you can use what's called data retrieval, which I'll go over on the next slide, and it makes the form much easier and faster to submit. If you cannot use that process, you just manually enter your information. If your student filed taxes in 2015, then they also would have a financial section. If not, they put that they're not filing and did not file, and they're all set. They won't be asked those questions. So in terms of your 2015 tax information, to submit that on this form, using the data retrieval process, I have listed out the steps here. It's a very easy process to do, so I'll summarize it for you. When you get to the parent financial section of this form, you will have the option to link to the IRS because they're both federal forms, federal sites. You can go in there and pull your tax information from the IRS and populate your student's FAFSA. This greatly reduces errors. It reduces the chance that you're going to be selected for verification due to manually typing it in and having errors. So we highly suggest that if you have the ability, if you are able to use this data retrieval process, that you use it. It will make it easier for you in the long run. And again, your student can use this as well if they file taxes in 2015. You do not have to have electronically submitted your taxes. They just need to have been filed. You could have done it by paper, that's fine. This is still available to you. Because this is somewhat of a new process that the government has, not all filing statuses or tax returns are eligible for it. So if you happen to fall into one of these categories down below, married filing separately, an amended return, you'll manually type the information in. And it's not a terribly difficult process. It does say what line to look for in your 1040 to help you a little bit, but just know it won't be available to everyone, but for most people, if you can, use this. Once you submit the FAFSA, your student is going to get a student aid report. And this is emailed, so when you sign up for the FAFSA and you're putting an email in, try to also make it an email that your student's not going to ignore for 6 months. Make it something that you can make sure they're checking. On the student aid report, it's very important that you double check, make sure that everything you put there is accurate, that the social security numbers are correct, the birthdays are correct. There are often mistakes with that. It might be another one of your children that you put for their birthday or the wrong social security number. Just double check that. That will hold up the entire financial aid process. But the student aid report is also going to say if your student was selected for verification. Because the FAFSA is primarily a self-reporting form, the government wants to verify that the information that's reported is accurate. And so they will select people to be verified, which means that you will be required to send the school additional tax information. If you see that your student has been selected, it's very important that you get the school the information they need as quickly as possible. Every financial aid award that you receive until verification is complete is estimated. So you want to make sure before your student enrolls in a school, before they're committed somewhere, you have a solidified financial aid award. So if you see that verification flag on the student aid report, follow up with the schools, make sure that you get them whatever they need so that your student is all set, the form is taken care of, and you know a final out-of-pocket cost. If your 2015 tax information is very, very different than what your current earnings look like, you still have to use 2015 information on this form. This is one of the flaws of having the form available earlier. So if you are in a situation where it works in your favor, you are earning significantly less, that's fantastic, just go on your way. But if you are in a situation where you are now earning significantly less than you were in 2015, you still put 2015 on there, and then go contact the schools and ask them what documents they need from you to make those adjustments. You cannot make the adjustments on your own, or that will almost guarantee your student is selected for verification. The school will put it right back where it should have been. So enter everything in accurately and then contact the schools because they have the permission from the government to go ahead and modify your FAFSA so that it is more accurate of what your current situation looks like financially. The CSS profile is very similar to the FAFSA. There is a fee with this form. And because this is not a federal form, that data retrieval process is not available. But in many other ways, it is just like the FAFSA. So it's going to use 2015 information as well. This has always been available in October, so you can definitely submit this now if your schools are looking for it. It's one per student, not per family. And there are some schools that are going to require non-custodial information as well. So for both of these forms, the FAFSA and the CSS profile, if you, as parents, are still married, both of your income goes on the form. If you are divorced or separated, it's the custodial parents' information that's on this form. Custodial would be defined by the court. You have the student more than 50% of the time. you're supporting them in some way financially, more than 50% of the time, or you're claiming the minor taxes. It's kind of how you guys are deciding custodial. It's custodial parents' information on these forms. If you are remarried as a custodial parent, it's your new spouse's information as well. But because that can be a sticky situation, there are schools that then also require non-custodial information. So make sure that if your school looks for the CSS profile and that may apply to you, you follow up with them. What else might you need to get them? When you go through this process, it's a little bit more comprehensive than the FAFSA as well. So whereas the FAFSA was not looking at all income or assets, the CSS profile will look for anywhere you could have forgotten you put money 20 years ago. And they will ask for every asset that you have, every asset that is there for your student as a beneficiary. So if you don't know the exact information, you can try to do your best to estimate with this. But this form is a little bit longer than the FAFSA. It's more comprehensive. So do the FAFSA first, get the easy one out of the way, and then you can slowly work through this. Not every school will require this every year. So that's something that's up to the school, but again, make sure if your student's applying to a private school, you check if they need this. Not all of them will require that. So when you submit these forms, the school is then able to tell you what your student is eligible for. And this is the calculation for eligibility for financial aid. So it's the cost of attendance minus a family's expected family contribution, and that is the financial need that your student has at that school. That is how much financial aid they need to make that school affordable. So I'm just going to go through defining those definitions, how that's looked at from a financial aid perspective. So cost of attendance is those direct charges that you'll see on a billing statement, tuition, room and board if your student is on campus, but it's also the indirect charges. So if your student attends a school in California, the flight to get out there is part of their cost of attendance. It's the cost that they are going to have for an education at that school. Now it's a reasonable cost, so it's not first class flying, the school can limit that, but it's generally the cost that they will incur. So it's important when you go to visit these schools and you go to open houses this fall, ask the schools what do they anticipate a student's indirect costs to be. Are there fees that students normally end up incurring that you're just not going to see on a billing statement that you need to anticipate, so you know that total overall budget to have for that year? All right, so if you have dozed off at all, this is the only 2 minutes I want you to pay attention to. When you submit your FAFSA, on that student aid report, you are going to see an EFC. It will tell you what your expected family contribution is. That is absolutely in no way, never, ever a guarantee of what you are paying for college. And the reason I want to stress that is because you are getting an EFC so much earlier in the process than what used to happen, is that you cannot get an EFC back on the FAFSA and see it as somewhat of a reasonable number. We can figure out how to financially afford this. And then assume that that is all you have to pay for college and tell your student, go apply anywhere. We can come up with this $10,000 the government said we need to pay. Go anywhere. That's just not realistic of what happens with financial aid. And so I'll go over examples that will illustrate that a little bit more. But the biggest fear that I have with this early FAFSA is that people will misinterpret what the EFC is. It's very important that you don't take that number and say, this is all I have to pay. Now on the flip side, if you get a number back and you have a minor heart attack, you can still get financial aid even if it seems too high, even if it seems like it's a number you just can't afford. So I'll go over examples with that to illustrate both points. But when you see this EFC, you have to just take it as part of that calculation that schools use to determine what you might be able to get should they have the money. There are a lot of ifs with this, so you don't want to hold this as a Bible and say to your student, go anywhere. So your EFC is never changing no matter what school your student attends. The eligibility for financial aid may change because part of the calculation is the cost of the school. So if one school costs significantly more, your student's eligible for more aid at that school. So there are some schools where your student will get a subsidized Stafford loan, which is that interest-free loan, and some schools where they won't, because your need is different at every school. But it's the need that changes, and it's the cost of the school that changes. Your EFC is the same no matter what. And when you get a financial aid award, and you break it down and you see what's a grant and a scholarship or what's a loan or work study, it's important that you ask the school and take it a step further of how they would define that financial aid. Is it need-based or is it merit-based? Need-based financial aid means that in that calculation of cost of attendance minus EFC, you have a need there, there's a remainder, so you demonstrate that need for financial aid. Merit-based means that your student has earned this through academic achievement, through athletic performance, through any type of participation, because the school will give a grant if your student participates in a specific club. Merit-based financial aid, it's on the student to maintain. The student keeps a specific GPA, they keep participating in that program. Need-based financial aid is dependent on having need. So when you fill out the FAFSA every year, it's looking at your income and your assets. It's not looking at your debt. So every year that you fill out this FAFSA, it takes into account a new year's worth of earnings. So if you worked significantly harder one year, if you had a bonus one year and your earnings went up, then your EFC went up. When your EFC increases, your need in that calculation decreases. And so every year that your student is evaluated for financial aid, their eligibility for need-based financial aid can change, and you may not have any need one year. So you may lose need-based financial aid. And that makes it very difficult to predict for 4 years what your cost is going to be if it's going to fluctuate on your earnings. If you work in a job that is commission-based or bonus incentive-based, it's really a conversation you need to have with the school. How can this fluctuate from year to year? Merit-based, again, is much easier to predict because you can just ensure beyond your student to keep participating or keep their grades up. So make sure that the school clarifies, how is this financial aid offered to my student? What are the terms of that? So these are examples that I wanted to go over of the award packages. So taking that same $45,000 cost and the same $10,000 EFC from the prior example, you have $35,000 worth of need here. The government will give all students that $5,500 Stafford loan that I mentioned. And work studies typically around $1,500. So in an ideal situation, the school would come in and give $28,000 to your student. So when you receive this financial aid award, it would say total financial aid, $35,000. $28,000 is free, $1,500 is earned, and $5,500 is repaid. And so this is why you really have to break that award down further, because although it's $35,000 worth of financial aid, although the school has met your need through financial aid, it's not all free. So it's important you really understand what the breakdown of that is. Even though it's not a $35,000 grant, it's not all free money that they've met your need, you still at least have your need met through financial resources. So all in all, this is not a bad financial aid package. This is also not a typical financial aid package. What typically happens is they start with your EFC again, and the government will offer the same to the student. But the school can't give you $28,000. So you have an unmet need of $15,000. So even though in this example your EFC is $10,000, that will never change. Your actual out-of-pocket cost is more than double what you anticipated, because the school does not have the financial resources to give you what you qualified for. So we have many, many phone conversations with parents that call that get very angry. They didn't read the award letter, they saw an EFC, and they just committed to a school. In an ideal world, you could do that. But more often than not, schools do not have the financial resources to give a full need financial aid award. and you end up with a significantly higher out-of-pocket cost than you had anticipated. So it's very, very important that when you see that EFC, you don't assume that's what you're paying. Make sure you really talk to your student about the fact that you still need to wait for these award packages to see what every school is going to cost. The reverse of that can happen, and it's not typical, but I do want to illustrate that. So this is that good financial aid package. Your need has been met through financial aid, just to compare. But in this award, your EFC is irrelevant. So you can switch out athletic amounts for any type of participation grant, call it all academic. This is all merit-based financial aid. Your EFC is still $10,000 in this example on your FAFSA, but that's irrelevant because the school is not looking at that. This is financial aid that's not dependent on that EFC and that calculation. So even in the government's eyes, although it's still $10,000, your actual billed charges are $7,000 because your student earned financial aid that could exceed their need. And so if you see an EFC that is just very high, you should definitely talk to the admissions department about what non-need-based programs your student can apply for. What type of merit aid do they have? So make sure that you differentiate that merit versus need-based aid and understand that the EFC is just there for a calculation, and that is it. So I hope with those examples that I scared some people. That was my goal. And if I did, and if you're very concerned now, I really encourage you to use the net price calculator. On every single school's individual website, they are required by the government to have a net price calculator. And what this does is it gives you a mock financial aid package. So it's not a guaranteed award, but it is a very good estimate of what the school would offer your student in financial aid. You don't need to have any of those financial documents to complete the form. You can use estimates, but it's only as good as the information you put into it. So it's helpful to have something to reference. It takes about 10 minutes to complete on each school, and then you can have an idea of what the school would offer your student. The reason that the government started requiring this a few years ago is because they want you, before you let your student get emotionally attached to a school, before you continue to push them to a school that you don't know how much money they'll give, that you have some type of baseline to go off of. So if you fill this net price calculator out and it says the school would give your student $10,000, but you need $30,000 to make it affordable, it's not off by that much. The estimate is not. It's a school your student should still apply to, but understand that it's a financial reach. If it's a couple $1,000s variance, then definitely that's something you should keep encouraging your student to really look into. It's a very good tool to help you decide and start a conversation of what is really affordable. We were talking before, many students need grad school at this point. So if your students really are in a path where they need grad school, spend the money there. Don't spend a mortgage on an undergraduate degree only to have 3-4 more years of grad school come up. So really start to look at this and get an idea of what schools may offer your students. So in terms of student loans, I do want to mention this part as well because your student cannot get a student loan outside of that $5,500 without a cosigner. This has changed from about almost 10 years ago, but many people still are not aware of it. So I want to make sure everyone knows, even if your student sees that net price and they say, I don't care, I'll take a loan, it's not an option for them. They have that federal Stafford loan that they can take, that $5,500 for the year as a freshman, but any cost beyond that that you need to cover with a loan, they either need a cosigner on their own loan, or it has to be a parent loan that's in your name for their expenses. So it's very important that you understand going through this, you in some way are going to be attached to that payment that they have to make. I would highly recommend that you use loan calculators that are out there. The typical student loan repayment is about 10 to 15 years. So you don't want them taking on a mortgage of financial aid to be repaid in half the time. So make sure that your students are very aware of what those costs are going to be monthly when they graduate. How much are they looking at borrowing, not just for freshman year, but for 4 years? And then including grad school, what will their debt be? And it's really important that you sit down now, look at your finances and decide, what, if anything, are you willing to co-sign? You need to make the decision now because you are rational. When you get to April, I have seen far too many emotional and irrational financial decisions made because you want this to be done. And then this time next year, when your student has been at school for a month, you start to have that regret set in. So really decide now, what is something that's affordable or you're willing to do? And not just for this student, but how many students are coming behind them that you really have to think about possibly co-signing and borrowing for. So that way when the award packages come in the spring, it's a much more black and white conversation. The school got us where we need to be, this is financially feasible, or they're too far off, we had this discussion in the fall, this is just not going to be a reasonable place to attend. So start looking at that now so that it's something that you are not going to regret in the future. Outside scholarships are scholarships that your student can apply for that are not from the school they're attending or the federal or state government. When they start filling these applications out, they will get a lot of emails. So I recommend that they make a specific email account for these applications. That way they don't delete them out of their own email just to clear it up. When they are ready to fill them out, they can go in there and open them. Start with the smaller, more local scholarships. They tend to be a smaller amount, but you're competing with less people. So it's more worth the student's time and that investment of time. Check with any civic organizations that you belong to, your own employers. Naviance will have them posted here at the school as well. So really try to have your student look into these scholarships and apply for them. Not all of these scholarships are renewed for 4 years, and many of them won't tell you if your student has won until June. So they're not deciding factors in where your student attends, they're just helpful for that initial cost that they'll face. There are some scholarships that will ask for that EFC from the FAFSA, so you'll find that on the student aid report. And these should not have a cost associated with them, so don't send any money in to any of them. That's typically a scam situation there. When you win an outside scholarship, it's important that you tell the school, and prior to enrolling, ask the school what do they do and how do they apply those outside awards. If we go back to that example of $45,000 of cost, $10,000 EFC, so $35,000 of need. If your student received a $35,000 grant from that school and then won a $5,000 outside scholarship, there are schools that would then reduce the financial aid they offered your student to $30,000 because otherwise they would be over-awarded in financial aid. That need-based aid they wouldn't qualify for anymore. So it's important that if your student invests time in completing these, you really understand how the school is going to apply it and if it's really just going to negate any aid that they offered you to begin with. So when you go to schools this fall for open houses, make sure you ask some questions of the financial aid office or admissions. When should you expect to receive the award? As I mentioned earlier, every school will be a little bit different, but no one's timeframes will have jumped up significantly quite yet. So just so that way you know when to anticipate this from each school. Again, make sure that you ask how those outside awards affect the aid package. Can they be used for some indirect cost at the school, such as books, rather than reducing their overall financial aid? That non-custodial question, just don't forget, some schools do require non-custodial information. And if you need a waiver, because it's not possible to get that, make sure you understand what each school will require to waive those forms. What grants and scholarships are renewable each year? It's not often, but there are some schools that have very good freshman awards, but they're only for freshmen. So make sure you understand what could be renewed for 4 years. And then again, what is that merit aid where it's a guarantee if your student meets the requirements versus what could change. And if your financial circumstances change, is the school willing to work with you? There are many schools who set their budget for financial aid based on a cohort class of students in 1 year. So If that cohort of students is now junior, their financial aid budget was set 3 years ago, but you've lost a job. Are they willing and able to reevaluate the financial aid to try to find money for your student, or are you now stuck with paying for your mortgage and their education without any financial aid? So ask schools, what are they willing to do, or is it one financial aid package when you come in and then that's it? There's no possibility of changing. And as you go through the process, these are some websites that will offer you real information. You can not just Google and pick random sites. If you are selected for verification, the IRS website at the top here is where you will get what the school is asking for, irs.gov/transcript. It's basically a receipt of your 1040. Studentloans.gov goes over all of those Stafford loans, so that $5,500 that I mentioned, and any parent loans as well. NASFA is a professional organization for financial aid, but they have very good tips for parents and students. And then the U.S. Department of Higher Ed and the state of Connecticut, in case you were looking for specifics with federal grants or state financial aid. So what questions does anyone have now that I can help with?
So, I have a question. Your total cost for the private school was $45,000.
Mm-hmm.
That seemed very low. Also, with the Stafford student loan, the interest you put down was 6.8%. Is that anything to do with what it is now?
So the loan calculator? Oh, okay, yeah, let me answer that. So the total cost for that private school, the $45,000. The $45,000, it seemed low. Why? That was just an example, so I could have a $35,000 need. Yeah.
But the more thing was like that number was off. What about the 6.8?
Yeah, so the 6.8% in that student loan calculator, why was that there? So when you look at loans, so whether it's a Stafford loan or any type of loan, the federal Stafford loans, the interest rate will be set every year by July 1st. So right now, they're just under 4%. However, for private loans, for a loan that you may borrow $20,000 for, those will range heavily based on the cosigner's credit. And it depends on what loan company you borrow from. So 6.8 is a very good midpoint of where you're going to see student loans when you're looking at a private company, which depend on the cosigner's credit. So there are some companies that will give you, if you have excellent credit and a great debt to income ratio, you might get 5%, 5.25% of a fixed rate. Some companies will go up to 12%. 6 to 8% is typically where we're seeing our families fall. But just know that that's just an example of, they can be much higher than what we're looking at right now for something like an equity loan. So they will vary based on your credit as a cosigner for anything that's, credit dependent.
I have several questions.
Mm-hmm.
First one is for the FAFSA, what criteria is the government using in terms of incomes? Are there any regional differences in their systems, or are they using one average for the entire country?
So is the government looking on the FAFSA at a regional difference when it's assessing your expense levels, basically? Cost of living, it is not. It's looking at just on a national level.
Which puts people in this area at a disadvantage.
So it definitely, yes. So in this area, in the tri-state area, it does put, significant disadvantage for families.
So do schools tend to give more?
Yeah, so do the schools tend to
Raise
give more
Yeah.
because they have an understanding of that.
Yeah.
For the FAFSA, or schools that are FAFSA only, they don't because they can't change that federal calculation. But with the CSS profile, the schools have the ability to manipulate that information and change it how they want because it's how they're giving out their own specific funding. So there are schools that can change the way that they look at someone's eligibility or cost based on the state that they live in.
Okay. Second question, for early decision, if the financial aid packet is not, does not meet the family's needs, is that okay then? Is that the only reason that they can then withdraw withdraw from the early decision contract or not?
So for early decision, which is that binding enrollment, is financial aid, if it's not meeting the need of the family, the only way they can get out of that? Yes.
Technically.
The school can't come drag you out and force you to go there. So basically you can get out, I mean, really however you want. The problem is that there are schools that will then notify other schools you may have applied to that you had this binding agreement with them, so any application received prior really shouldn't be considered. Not many schools, but there are other implications to it. So if the financial aid is not satisfactory for you, whether it's meeting your need or not, you can still get out of it, because you could say it's not what I need or not what I can afford, regardless of the calculation. For early decision, which is binding, if your student is looking at a school like an Ivy League school where the only chance they have to get in is early decision because it basically fills up before then certainly consider that. If financial aid is irrelevant to you, which if you're here it's probably not going to apply, then consider it. There are a lot of admissions offices that will try to sway people into an early decision contract. And there's not a significant advantage to early decision unless it's a school that is exceptionally competitive or a major at that school that is exceptionally competitive. So make sure you make that decision on your own. There is a way to get out of it, but once your student applies and is accepted, they are supposed to withdraw their applications from every other school. So if you do go through the process and withdraw the applications and then turn down that school, you have to resubmit everything to those other schools again.
And to add to that, if you're applying early to that school, that means your child really wants to go there. And if you have to withdraw because of your financial aid, you can't apply as a regular.
Right, so yeah.
Regular, so
Right, so yeah, once you
Right.
withdraw from a school, you cannot then apply
So you kind of
for their
should
base
yourself.
package.
Yeah.
Right, so in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, there are some early decision students that it's a really great choice for them. Again, the school is competitive, the major is exceptionally competitive. They're an athlete that's signing an NLI, which is a national letter of intent, so they're already committing. Why not just go early decision at that point? For a lot of students that are interested in early decision, it is not a good decision because you are not evaluating what any other school can give you from financial aid. So I don't want to totally discourage it because I know there are a lot of students who are looking at competitive majors and competitive schools. I do just want you to take what the admissions office says with a grain of salt and understand you are then at that point losing your opportunity to look at other schools' awards.
You mentioned that you could be chosen for verification inside the FAFSA application, and that you need to go to the schools that you applied to find out what is needed. So if you're applying to 5 or 6 schools, those schools will all be requiring the same additional information, or might each school have its own separate verification point that they need addressed?
So if you are selected for verification, you have to go to the schools to find out what to submit. Is it going to be the exact same thing for every school or potentially different? It will be similar, what each school requires. The documentation from the government will be all the same, but then there's typically at least one form that is school specific that corresponds with that verification process. So most of the time people did not do verification until they were very sure where their student would attend, but because this is available so much earlier, it is going to be looking at many schools that you'll want to contact.
So follow-up, and it could be that not all the schools you applied to are seeking additional verification. Could just be 1 or 2?
So would it be all the schools that you're applying to or just 1 or 2? If the government selects you for verification, it would be every school that your student has applied to.
Okay.
And the forms that they want in terms of a federal documentation would be the same. There are schools who have the ability, every school could if they want, take it further and ask for more information. And that's somewhat the problem with financial aid is the general basis of what everyone wants is the same, but if schools want, the government allows them to be more stringent. Mhm.
So, Eric, when you're doing your taxes, there are certain things that will trigger an audit and put you in a
So what triggers a verification process? Is there anything specific? The government will not say definitively what does, because they don't want people to be able to avoid what causes it. But generally, it's if there is a significant difference between your earnings and your AGI, so whether that's earned income or not, or you're reporting significant loss. There are people manually typing in the information is one of the bigger triggers. Anything that's manually entered.
And what's AGI?
The AGI is your adjusted gross income.
Okay, so the significant difference between earnings and projected.
Yeah.
Okay.
Manually typing in information is the main point that they'll start to review everything. So if you can use that data retrieval, that will significantly help. Anytime if you were to have 7 people in your house, 8 people, the more people you start to add to a household or go above a typical household size, they may start to look at you. There are a lot of people who will forget zeros on things, and they'll have earned $100 for the year, and they're supporting 5 people. So those types of differences will start to trigger that.
Is there a place in this form to let the schools know that how do the schools get the information from FAFSA?
So how do the schools get the information from FAFSA? When you are on the form, it's going to ask what schools you want it electronically sent to, and you can put in up to 10 schools, and it will send it all at the same time. If your student has more than 10 schools, send it to all 10, make sure they've received it. It takes about 5 business days at most. And then go back in, delete some schools, and send it to the remaining group. And it's the same thing with the CSS profile. You can send it to more than one school. Because schools can use the CSS profile in their own ways, there may be supplemental questions from one school versus another, but the basic part of the form you can send to everyone.
What do you mean by that, delete some of them and resend it? So if you're applying to 12 schools, you delete 2 and then you send it to the original 8 a second time?
So what do I mean by delete it and then send it to the rest? So if you send it to the first 10, you can delete all of them and send it to the next 2. You could just delete 2 and send it to the other 8 again. Won't really have an impact, they'll just get it again. It's just making sure that you have enough spaces available to add the new schools in.
Does the CSS have a link to the IRS, or does the CSS use the link to the FAFSA?
So does the CSS have a link to the IRS or anything to make it not a manual process? They do not. Because it's a private form, they don't have access to those federal sites.
Is there a comprehensive list of schools that require the CSS, or do you have to go into every school?
Yeah, so if there are a comprehensive list of all the schools that look for the CSS profile, on the College Board website there is. It doesn't list the deadlines the schools want it though, so I would still, once you know, go check the schools individually.
Once you start the process of filling out the form, I think it's like 30 pages or whatever. But if you go in, can you go in and out? It will save it at that particular point?
So with either the FAFSA or the CSS, can you go in and out of the form? You definitely can. You can go in and complete some of it, save it, log out, and then go back in when you have time or less of a headache, whatever it is, finish it. Any other questions?
So, Stafford loan,
Mhm.
it's signed for by the student, it's guaranteed by the student, not by the parents,
Mhm.
and there's no credit check to the student. But an unsubsidized Stafford loan, the meter starts running on the interest on day 1. So when this kid and he might get a Stafford loan every year for 4 years. So when this kid graduates 4 years later, he's got a huge basket of debt.
So that unsubsidized Stafford loan starts to accrue interest right away, even though there's no payment due. So that's going to accrue for all 4 years. Yes, and the rest of the loans that are available, any of the private loans or the parent loans, are all going to start to accrue interest as well. The only possibility is if you are eligible for a subsidized loan based on the amount of need you have at a school. You can certainly make interest payments, and we always encourage families to while the student's enrolled, even though you're not required to make those payments. But it does start to accrue and compound and just sit there and wait for them at the end. Is there a question that I can answer with that? Or?
So then they spent 4 years getting a degree in medieval tapestry, and now.
Right, and that's why I really emphasized, even with the Stafford loans, the Stafford loans, depending on their interest rate, which every year the Congress can change. Right now it's fairly low, but if you're looking at a private loan, which again can have a much higher interest rate based on a cosigner's credit and debt to income, you are looking after interest, depending if you're borrowing $20,000 a year, you're paying a significant amount for that education. And the other thing to really keep in mind that people forget often, because those federal Stafford loans are on the award package, and even though you know in the back of your mind that's a loan, there are many people who take that $5,500 a year and then they go apply for a private loan for $20,000, and they forget, okay, that's really $20,500 the first year. And so they think, okay, 20, 40, 60, 80, got it. Forgetting that this other amount is there, they have to keep adding into that total balance as well. So it adds up very, very quickly. And there are far too many affordable colleges to go and get a bachelor's degree at somewhere that's $200,000+ with interest. So I know I just probably built on the trouble in your head, but that's right. Yeah. So can FAFSA be used for applying abroad? If it is a school, if you are attending an American institution that has campuses abroad, you can use the FAFSA for that. So there are a lot of schools that have affiliations with different campuses in Italy, Ireland, Australia, all over the world. Then you can still use your aid to go there. Okay, unfortunately, many of the questions are school specific. The government gives guidelines up until a certain point, and then the schools kind of go from there. So good luck. Ask schools as many questions as you have. And you can always call me if you have general things.
Just a quick reminder, thank you so much, Morgan. For those of you who have seniors, please be on the lookout in February. You'll be getting notifications through the school counseling update and an e-blast about the Independent Scholarship Foundation. So keep an eye on that for February. And just for our scholarships, we do require both the FAFSA and the CSS profile. And just like Morgan informed you earlier, there's also a lot of scholarships that we display on Naviance. There's literally a link that says scholarships. So thanks so much. Also, don't forget your school counselors are great resources, and thanks for coming out.